This is the BadgeBuilder card design tutorial. If you've just opened the program will appear just as you see it right here. Now, we suggest that this be the very first step that you do, creating a card design when you're going through the steps of getting your BadgeBuilder system online. And in fact, the Quick Launch Wizard is really one step beyond what you want to do. And so what we suggest that you do, instead of selecting any of the options here, would be instead to go down and click on Cancel. When you do that, you're really going to need to do two things. The first one is that the system has security built right into it to prevent people from being able to do certain things with it unless they're logged in. So the first thing we're going to have you do is go up onto the toolbar to the set of keys and go ahead and click on that button. And when you do that, you're going to be given the ability to log in. Now, if you don't have a high security situation or it's just not a problem at all, you can leave the default of Master and ID card, although we rather strongly recommend that you change it because the situation with a badge database is that you are giving IDs to employees or members of your organization, and you don't want to let any old person be able to go and create a card and perhaps purport to be somebody that they're not as part of your organization. That being said, we're going to go ahead and put in Master and ID card, and when that's done, you can go ahead and you'll see the button says Log In, and you'll be able to log in, and you'll now be down in Master mode. So the first thing that we need to do before we do anything else is that we need to create a card design. And a card design is what's called a card template or a CTM file in BadgeBuilder terms. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to File, and we're going to go down to Template File Management, and we're going to say that we want to build a new badge template. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is that there are a number of different styles of templates, and really all they are is just a physical card size. Vast majority of people are going to either want to be selecting credit card vertical or credit card horizontal, but you can select some of the other ones and also create a custom badge size if you have a special badge size that you need to create. For our purposes, though, we're going to create a horizontal card design under credit card, so we're going to go ahead and click credit card horizontal. You'll notice several things about this. First of all, the first thing is that we get two design toolbars that show up down the left-hand side that were not there previously. The other thing that you'll notice is that we now have a completely blank card up on the screen with a tool that allows us to go ahead and move around inside of that card. Now, the idea here is that we can create rectangles that are designed for any one of a number of different operations. And a lot of those operations are defined actually in our second toolbar, and so let's go over them briefly. If you look down this toolbar, you'll notice that there are several different buttons. This one is for creating a rectangle designed for text information. This is for creating one that is barcodes. This is one for creating a bitmap rectangle. A bitmap rectangle would be something like a company logo or a picture of a company building or a state seal, something along those lines that you would get from a file that you might have been provided or a picture you might have taken. This item right here is a photo rectangle. That differs from the previous one in that this is going to be a placeholder for where a person's picture is going to be stored on the card. Then some less frequently used ones include if you have signature capture as one of the options, then you have a box for creating an area on the card where people can actually enter their signature digitally. We have the ability for you to create a PDF 417 barcode, which is a two-dimensional barcode that can store a great deal of data. We have the ability for you to actually store fingerprint information as an actual image of a fingerprint as an option. There's also a feature called multi-bitmap, which is a specialized way of displaying a image depending upon some data that you have on the card. So let's say if you happen to have an employee, it shows one logo, and if you have a contractor, it shows a different logo, but you don't want to have a whole different card design because just the logo is changing. That's something that you could use to do that. Then the last type of rectangle that you can create is a shape, and that will allow you to draw a shape that's either filled or not filled. It could be a star, it could be a square, a rectangle, circle, and so forth. So if you have the need for a basic shape, that's something that you can use here. So let's go ahead now, and we'll go to some of the other items in just a minute so that you can see those. But for the moment, let's talk about just putting some aspects of our card design together. Frequently people like to start with the picture, so let's start with the picture. So we press our button, it sticks down. We come over to our card design and we click on the card design, and then we can drag, click and drag. I'm actually left-clicking and dragging out to approximately a reasonable size for the photograph. And then I release. And you'll see that I have an item that says photo now, so I know that this is going to be for somebody's photograph. I have some drag, what are called drag handles, that allow me to drag at different points if I wanted to further adjust. Or if I go in the middle here, I can actually move the area around and reposition it on the card itself. So that's moved it very slightly. Okay. Good first step. Now, next thing we might want to do is put a logo on the card. So let's go ahead and click on the bitmap image, and we'll click over here, and we'll set up an area where we want to have our bitmap image. Now, if we right-click on that, and when you want to get into the properties of a particular item, you want to do a right-click. So when you right-click on that rectangle, you'll see you get Edit Rectangle Parameters. So we'll go ahead and do that, and we get up a whole bunch of options of things that we can do, many of which you probably don't actually need to manipulate unless you really wish to. But let's go through them very briefly. First of all, content format. As you'll notice, the items that we just discussed are in this drop-down list, so if you selected bitmap but you really wanted it to be a text box or photograph box, you can change the nature of that right here. The next thing is that you can actually work with your card design to actually round certain items, and you can select the amount of rounding that you want. So if I wanted to make this particular area slightly rounded around the edges, I can say 10% rounding, and that will round the edges, so that instead of a hard cornered square or rectangle, I actually get soft edges. Inverted, if for some reason you needed to take the contents of that particular box and turn it upside down, that would allow you to do that. Further down here, we have an item called rectangle color, and that allows us to specify that if we want a background color to appear or a border color to appear, and we can turn either one of those on or off as we see fit. You can also select the thickness of a border by clicking on border and then specifying the thickness down here. Borders and background colors are also perfectly selectable. In this case, we really don't care about having a background color, so leaving it white would be perfectly okay. Rectangle dimensions, this is really very straightforward. What this is telling us here is what the X and Y position are, what the top and from the left positions are of this particular box, as well as the overall size, the dimensions of the box that we've created. There's also a button, as you'll see here, called Auto Photo Size, a standard photograph size that comes from the old days of, say, Polaroid style images, was 1 inch by 1 1/4 inches. So if you needed to have that match that same set of dimensions, you could click Auto Photo Size, and that would allow that to that would automatically expand the box to be exactly those dimensions. Another important thing to mention about all of the things that I have just gone through so far is that they apply to every single type of field, no matter whether it's a rectangle for a picture, whether it's for the text, whether it's for a barcode, and so forth. These are all entries that all apply. What may change is the contents of what you see in here. Now, in this particular instance, we're working with a bitmap, so what we could do, we could capture or acquire it from a Twain source or from such as a scanner or a digital camera if we have a digital camera hooked up. But most likely what you're going to want to do is to actually select a picture that somebody has provided to you or that you have on your hard drive or a network drive and so forth. So we're going to go ahead and say Browse, and we're going to select our simple banner bitmap that we have that comes with our sample database that got installed during the installation of the program. So we're going to go ahead and say Open. Now that's going to have gone and selected that file, and what we can do is go ahead and say OK. And now we have that banner. Now, one very important thing to talk about when we talk about bitmaps, and that is aspect ratio. Aspect ratio talks about making certain that the proportions of the left to right and top to bottom are correct for the original image, and in this case they're actually not. So what we can do is use the capabilities of the BadgeBuilder program to adjust the size of that image to make it the right way, even though it may be shrunk down from where it actually started. So if we go ahead and right click and look at the rectangle parameters again, you'll see that there are buttons that say Auto Set Aspect, and we can do it based upon the width or based upon the height. So what we'll do is we'll change the height aspect of it, and we'll say OK. And what you'll notice now is that the image is now stretched, and it's now in its proper aspect ratio, so it is now properly proportioned. It's smaller than the original, almost certainly, but that doesn't matter. At least we know now that the proportions are correct. Okay, so we have an area for our photograph. We have an area for our bitmap. Now what we want to do is we want to put some fields on here for, let's say the person's name. So the next thing that we need to do is to create a field that's specifically for their name. So let's go ahead and put a field across here now that is specific to their name. Okay. There's a rectangle, and as you can see, it's being populated with just a repeating sequence of numbers. The repeating sequence of numbers is just to give you some sense of the width of the field in terms of how many characters it's likely to be able to fit. It may be a character or more or less depending upon exactly the content that you have. Again, let's look at the properties of this, because this might not be exactly the look that we're looking for. So if we right-click on this, we'll say Edit Rectangle Parameters, which you'll see there's a recurring theme here in terms of getting in and looking at the settings. Just as we mentioned before, most of the information around here is basically all exactly the same, even though we're now looking at text, whereas before we were looking at a bitmap. However, the area over here in the text options has changed quite dramatically. Let's go through these just for a moment. The first one is that we have the ability, when you have a box, for you to align the content of that box either left justified, center justified, or right justified, and also vertically to the top, center, or bottom. And so you will be able to make those choices depending upon what it is that you like in terms of the look. And so we can say that we'd like this to be centered and at the bottom, and now that's the way that the text will come out inside of the rectangle. It will come out at the bottom of the rectangle, and any text that comes out will be centered. Rotation. Sometimes people have a situation in which they wish to have the text rotate so that it is actually 90 degrees, or basically on its axis from where it is right at the moment. Under normal circumstances, the software automatically tries to determine whether you're trying to make it on its side or whether you're trying to make it come out flat. There are some situations where it can't make that evaluation correctly, though, and that gives you this opportunity to set the rotation manually to say, doesn't matter what the dimensions of the box are or the rectangle is, I want this to actually come out vertical, or I want it to come out horizontal. The third tab along allows you to specify information about fonts and the font color. The font color can be any color in the Windows palette, so it can be one of 16.7 million colors. The font is any Windows accessible font that's on your system. So if you have a font that's been installed, even if it's a somewhat unusual font, as long as it's recognized by Windows, you can use it. So let's go ahead and make a choice here. So let's go ahead and pick a font. Then we'll look down through the list here, and we'll pick something that's kind of interesting. There we go. That's a good one. And we'll pump up the size a little bit, say up to 16 point, and we can change to, this will allow you to make some basic changes to the color. If you want to make a more sophisticated one, you do it back in the other on the other screen. Okay, so let's say okay to that. So now we've got a pretty sophisticated one, but let's say the color isn't quite what we wanted. We can now select color here, and now we have the ability to pick from a much larger palette, including defining a custom color, which in here is allowed to be defined as up to 16.7 million colors, which is the standard color palette for Windows. So let's pick something that's maybe a darker red, and say okay to that. And now you can see that the darker red is what we have selected here. Just to finish off the process, let's go over and take a look at Other. One very, very important capability that you may very much want to use is called auto font sizing. The idea here is that if you've created a specific width field on your card, and it's for someone's name, for instance, you could easily have a situation in which you have mostly people's names who fit at the font size that you've selected, but perhaps you have somebody who has a very long name, and that name wouldn't fit, and so ends up getting cut off. Auto font sizing helps to deal with that problem by automatically scaling down the font size until it knows that it can fit. And this makes it so that you don't have to try to adjust the card design for the longest name. You just turn on auto font sizing and make certain that under normal circumstances the card will come out with the font exactly as you specified, but if you have a name that happens to be extraordinarily long, that the font size will be slightly sized down to fit into the best possible amount of space that it can without being cut off. So that could be a really important feature. So let's turn that on. The other feature here is suppress blank lines, and that has to do with if you happen to have a text field that has multiple lines. BadgeBuilder can have as many lines of text as can physically fit on the badge that you're creating. And one of the situations that you can end up with is if you have some card information that has a blank line in there, you might want to prevent that from coming out in the situation where there isn't any information. Something that doesn't happen very often, but it's capable of doing that, and that feature would be selected here. So we won't actually select that, but we'll go ahead and we'll say OK. And as you can see now in our rectangle, we now have the new font with the new color and the new size all being reflected on the card design. So let's make a couple of other small changes to this card design. First of all, let's add a barcode onto the bottom here. If you have a time and attendance type of system, you might need a barcode, or if you have a meal system, you might need a barcode. Now, barcode is going to be representing information, mostly numeric, although can be alphanumeric sometimes, as bars on the card. And so what we would need to do is to specify really only the type of barcode that we want to use to represent our data. So if we right-click on the barcode, again, rectangle parameters is where we'd want to go. You'll see that our information here is all basically the same. There are a number of different barcode formats that are supported by the system. Just scrolling through them just to give you a sense of that. Typically, the first three, code 3 of 9, extended code 3 of 9, and interleave 2 of 5 are probably the most popular ones, but you have an option to do a lot of other ones depending upon your particular application. There are also density settings and information for checksums and quiet zone widths. That's all information that you would need to be specified by the reader or the company in which the card was going to be used in case they have any particular specifications. So we'll go ahead and we'll say OK to this now. Now again, there is no data yet in the barcode because we're only creating a template, which is not aware of any information. It just is a structure. And so that's what we've done. So let's say for now that we're actually happy with this particular card design. What we can do is we can go up to Design, and we can say that we want to export the design as, and this is going to be exporting it as a CTM file. And the CTM file is something that's going to get used in a couple of different situations. It's extremely important during the creation of a database, which is mentioned both in the simple and also the expert tutorials for database creation. It also allows you a method by which to add new cards to an existing database. If you just need a new card design to go in your database, or a card design to replace an existing card design, perhaps you have a logo change or a complete card design change that you'd like to implement, a CTM file would be your good first step. So a CTM file is very important. It also allows, if you have multiple locations, for you to take a CTM file from one location, copy it from that location to another location, perhaps a remote location, and they would be able to create a database using your card design rather than you having to shuffle an entire card database or them having to recreate the card design from scratch. So it's a very popular, powerful way of moving card designs from a template into an actual database where information is being presented and so forth. As you can see here in our list, we already have a number of canned card designs that you can use, although they are relatively simplistic and certainly not going to be specific to your particular industry. So a card design that you create will not only get you familiar with the card design process for BadgeBuilder, but also allow you to get a customized card that fits into what it is that you'd like to do. So let's go ahead and call this one tutorial, since this is the tutorial for card design, and it's not CTM. And we'll go ahead and we'll say save. So at least now we have a tutorial.ctm that's saved all of our changes. Okay, let's talk about a couple of other of the features that we can see here in the toolbars, because there are some powerful features here. One of them is that you have the ability to cut, copy, and paste any kind of field that you have on here. So if I have the text field selected, I can go ahead and cut that. I can also go ahead and paste it. If you're familiar with keyboard shortcuts, the Control-V, Control-C type of cutting and pasting, Control-X for cutting, those are all perfectly functional here. One of the other things that you can do is that if you need to be very specific, you can zoom in. So if I click on the zoom, you'll notice now that the card design has been zoomed in, and I can see something, I can see it in much more detail. This allows you to be a lot more specific, especially when you're working with a card that's only, let's say, 3 by 2. The other thing that we can do is to return it to a scale of 1, which is the standard one, or we can zoom out further if we wish to, or zoom in very tightly. So you have multiple levels of zoom in and zoom out. The next set of features might be useful to you if you have the need to overlay information over the top. One of the ways that people frequently will do this is that they will put a signature sort of over the bottom of a photograph so that there's some authenticity and makes it more difficult to reproduce that card to look authentic. And so one of the things that you can do is that you can layer various different rectangles over one another. So if I take and pull the text up, for instance, you'll notice the text is actually overrunning the picture, the logo, and it would also be overrunning the photograph. But what we can do is we can actually send this rectangle to the back if we want to by clicking on that button right there. And what you'll see now is that that rectangle is now being overrun by the photograph and the bitmap. And if I click this button up here, which brings the thing to the foreground, it now brings it over the top. So if you have a situation where you would like to be able to overlay pieces and you want to be able to specify the layering, you can layer things many layers deep if you want. It isn't just one layer. So we can move things around. One of the other things that you can do is to move through the rectangles, especially useful if you happen to have a small rectangle that might have just a very small area, and it's hard to find, or it doesn't have a border, but you'd like to be able to find it. This allows you to cycle through each of the rectangles, so in case there's one that you might have lost or it's hard to get a handle on just using the mouse, this actually allows you to move things around. Several other features that are also very useful are the ability for you to move between assignments and also display information on the card. They don't really apply in this particular situation because we don't have a database. However, if you did have a database open, you would actually be able to toggle between the design look and actually seeing what the card would look like without having to keep going in and out of the card design. Something that's mentioned in one of the other tutorials about using the software in a more advanced mode. One of the other things that can help you is to actually be able to see the alignment of various different rectangles. This could be particularly important if you have many fields and you would like them all to line up nice and cleanly. And so one of the things that you can do is you can open this button up and just move this over a little bit, and you'll see that there are a number of various different alignment tools, including the ability for you to stretch rectangles one way or another. If you selected multiple rectangles by clicking on them with the control button down on your keyboard, you'll notice that a whole bunch of various different options become available, including things matching to size, aligning left, aligning right, aligning to the middle, all kinds of various different features and functionalities. And if you're not sure what they're all about, you'll see down at the bottom of the BadgeBuilder window, when you have your mouse over anything, you get tooltips to tell you exactly what it is that it's doing. So, for instance, if we wanted to align to the right and make certain that our text and our picture were aligned to the right, the BadgeBuilder Elite picture, we can click on that button and that will assure us that the edge here and the edge here are matching up. And that's what that toolbar alignment is all about. And if we want to turn it back off again, we simply click on this button and that will turn it back off. Finally, if you need to actually look at a list of rectangles on the badge, again, if you've lost one or you're not sure where it is, or you'd like to see things that might be appearing on the back, even though you're looking at the front, you can click on that button and it will actually give you an accounting of all the different types of items on there. And if for some reason you've got one that you created that was really small and you'd like to be able to do something about it, you can actually click on it and then say that you want to edit it and be able to get into the editing area that way. Usually something you need if you need some more sophisticated card design capabilities, but something that can still be quite useful. That really ends the card design tutorial, and if you are happy with the card design, again, you can export it out if you've made any changes, or you can simply go ahead and say close, and it will ask you if you want to save the changes, and if I go ahead and say yes, that will go ahead, save the changes, and cancels us or closes us out of the card design mode. That concludes this portion. If you're interested in moving on to now creating a database or using the program, we encourage you to look at some of the other tutorials that are available.